Hey Disnerds! We've been Disney Parks fans for decades at this point, and we visited the Disney parks in Florida and in California more times than I even can count, like more than 1,000 at this point. So we were super excited this summer when we finally got an opportunity to visit Tokyo Disneyland in Japan to see how those parks stack up to the parks that we know and love here in the US.
As much as we love the Disney parks here in the US, we gotta be honest. I think maybe the Tokyo Disneyland experience has forever ruined us on the US parks here. They just blew the US parks out of the water on a number of levels.
I'm Clover, and this is Loop with Clover Loop. In this video, we're looking at 5 ways that Japan just does it better. Let's get started.
Let's start with the most objective measure, price. Going to Disney parks in Japan is significantly less expensive than going to parks here in the US.
Part of that is the fact that as of right now, the US dollar is strong compared to the Japanese yen. So if you use American dollars, your money's going to go a little farther in Japan these days. But even if you eliminate the favorable exchange rates, the Japan parks are still a lot more affordable.
Let's compare, shall we? A one-day, one-park ticket to Disney World in Florida ranges between $109 to $149. If you look at that, for Disneyland in California, it's even more expensive, with tickets ranging between $104 to $194 for single-day access. You compare that to Tokyo Disneyland for the same calendar period, and you're looking at between 8,400 and 10,900 yen. That translates to about between $58 and $75. That's a huge difference, which can really add up if you are spending multiple days at the parks and bringing the whole family with you.
For perspective, we did 4 days at the Tokyo Disney parks this summer during peak season, and there were 3 of us. Our park tickets cost about $900 total. If we had gone to the California Disney parks instead, we would have been looking at like $2,300 for park tickets alone.
With park tickets being so much cheaper in Japan, it's easier to justify the various upgrades that you can buy to avoid waiting in lines. Tokyo Disneyland's version of skipping the line is called Premier Access, and you can buy them to avoid the wait on certain popular rides and attractions. On average, those upgrades cost between $10 and $15, which is well worth it.
Additionally, many attractions offer fast pass style line management systems totally for free, which definitely makes me miss the good old days of the fast pass system when it was used here in the US.
It's not just park tickets though. Merchandise, food, which is better than what's available here in the US by nearly all accounts, drinks and snack vending machines. Really, everything is cheaper inside the park. And again, this is partially due to the buying power of the US dollar in Japan right now, but it's true even when you correct for currency fluctuations.
If you're traveling to Japan from another country, you're gonna have to factor in stuff like flights and hotels, obviously. The costs of those elements can vary widely, so we're not saying that a trip to Tokyo overall is necessarily the budget way to do Disney. However, given just how expensive the Disney parks part of Disney vacations have become here in the US, especially over the last few years, it does sting a little bit to go overseas and pay so much less for such an amazing experience, which brings us to our next point.
We know that ticket prices are cheaper in Tokyo than they are here in the US. There's no disputing that. That's objective. But what did the most damage to our feelings about the US parks was that the guest experience in Tokyo is leagues ahead of what you get here in the US. You might say to yourself, actually, Loop, that's a subjective opinion. And fine, I guess it is subjective, but it really didn't feel like there was much question about this. On a lot of different levels, the Japanese parks are doing it better than the US, which is really saying something considering that Disney parks, cruises, and resorts in the US are arguably the pinnacle of guest experiences in this country. So what exactly do the Tokyo parks do so much better?
Well, I'll tell you, Loop. Let's start with cleanliness. These parks are like immaculate. Disney parks in the US are clean, for sure, when you compare them to any other theme park, but in Japan, it is next level tidiness. A big part of this, I think, is cultural. In comparison, most public places in Japan make public places in America look like outhouses.
Case in point would be the bathrooms. You might be aware that bidets in Japan are standard issue. All of the toilets are robots who are there to pamper your bunghole in myriad luxurious ways. The Disney bathrooms are no exception, with a bathroom experience taken to the next level. I went into one bathroom at Tokyo DisneySea, and they were playing calming ocean sounds. It was so clean that I think the stalls were literally being cleaned in between every use.
That brings us to staffing. The cast members at Disney parks are legendary for their friendliness and for the very high level of service that they provide. That's the case at the Tokyo Disney parks, but multiply that by like 10, because it feels like there's that many more cast members. I can't remember the last time I've been to a theme park and felt like there were almost too many people trying to help me, but that's what it felt like in these parks.
Yes, and we spoke very little Japanese while we were there. We just knew a few pleasantries to get by. But the cast members were more than willing to be patient with us and to work with us through translation apps if we were ever trying to conduct any sort of complex business. I actually never felt lost due to the language barrier.
The guest experience quality does not stop there, though. Even the ride experience felt up-leveled at the Japan parks, both in terms of cleanliness and maintenance. I don't think I saw a single malfunctioning animatronic while I was there. And that's really saying something because Tokyo Disneyland is home to the last remaining version of Splash Mountain. And there are a lot of animatronics on Splash Mountain. They all looked perfect.
Which was a refreshing change because in the US, the Splash Mountain maintenance really went downhill in the final years of that ride, which was kind of sad to see. That definitely wouldn't fly in the Japan parks. They take amazing care of those rides, and that really uplevels the entire experience.
Simply put, the rides at these parks are amazing. Some were Japanese versions of classics, and others were totally unique. But what really blew me away were the shows and parades. We didn't get to see nearly as many of them as I would have liked, but the ones that we did see were mind-blowing.
One thing that's unique about some of the shows is that you have to do an entry request through the app. It's kind of a lottery system. You put in the show you want to see, and you get back a yes or a no in terms of whether you get to see it. So in that sense, it can be a bit of a bummer if you have your heart set on a certain show, but you don't win the lottery. However, if you do get in, it's a super well-organized experience. We went to see a show at Tokyo Disneyland called Mickey's Magical Music World, and we actually had assigned seats, which was kind of cool. It alleviated the stress of feeling like you need to jostle for the best position and then wonder whether you could have done better.
That show was like bananas too. The sets were amazing and the performers were so good. And when it comes to the shows themselves, you don't need to worry about language barriers. It was always perfectly clear what was happening, even when I didn't understand the Japanese being spoken. These kinds of performances don't tend to be overly wordy anyway. Speaking of speaking, I love hearing Minnie, Mickey, and the rest of the gang speak Japanese because it reveals a whole new dimension to these Disney characters that I grew up with. Daisy speaks Japanese? That's so metal.
The other show experience that blew my mind was the electrical parade at night at Tokyo Disneyland. The electrical parade has always been one of my all-time favorites in the US parks. And yes, Japan did it even better. It helped that it was a premier access attraction, which meant you could pay a little extra to gain access to an assigned seating spot. And that was so worth it. We were able to sit and watch the whole parade and have an amazing view. And the floats were spectacular. They really enhanced the electrical parade concept with the music, the floats, the performer costumes. I just sat there with my jaw hanging open the entire time. It was so good.
All right, so the prices are better, the shows and parades are better, the rides are better. What about the resort experience? Surely Tokyo can't top Walt Disney World as a resort, right?
Yeah, I think they do. And don't get me wrong, I love staying at Disney hotels in the US. I love the Disney bubble. I prefer to live in it completely when I'm on a Disney vacation. However, there are challenges in both California and Florida when it comes to the resort experience. In Anaheim, the bubble experience is pretty underwhelming because there's just 3 Disney hotels affiliated with 2 parks, and the whole resort is just kind of wedged into the city of Anaheim itself. It's not very magical. In Orlando, the bubble experience is better because Disney Disney owns everything, and there are 25 plus different hotels. But it's so spread out, and it's really a lot of work to get from the hotels to the parks sometimes.
The Tokyo Disney Resort is kind of the best of both worlds. The resort hotels are super convenient to the parks, like in Anaheim, and the entire experience is still quite immersive, like in Florida. All of the Tokyo Disney hotels, including some of its very nice partner hotels, are on the monorail line that connects you to the parks. It's incredibly convenient to get around. And if you're interested in hotel hopping to see what all the different venues have to offer, that's super easy.
The only possible exception would be Ikspiari, which is kind of their equivalent of Downtown Disney or Disney Springs. It's a big shopping and restaurant district, and it's not as heavily Disney branded as you see in the US, but it is a lot of fun, and I really can't dock them any points on that.
We stayed at the Tokyo Disneyland Hotel on our visit, which is one of the more premium options. We were in a super adorable Tinkerbell themed room that I loved. The room provided pajamas and slippers and these cute little cups and toiletry kits. Some of my favorite souvenirs from our trip were actually the freebies that were included with our room.
The restaurants, the lounge, the gift shops were really top-notch from a Disney standpoint. I can't recommend their resort experience highly enough. Do I love the US resorts? Yes, but they could take a page from Japan.
Finally, a big shout out to the crowd management at Tokyo Disneyland. In Japan, there's just a higher level of expectation for order, I think. You might see videos about the huge lines that form to get into the parks, and that is real. Tons of people line up for rope drop at these parks. But once the turnstiles open, the crowd is moved along incredibly efficiently, and within like 30 minutes of park opening, it's pretty easy to just walk in and out of the park at that point.
Inside the parks, lines could get long, but most were still reasonable, and the majority of the attractions offered an option to not wait in line at all. Some of those were paid, some were not paid. We expected navigating the system would be overwhelming, but it really wasn't at all. The system that these parks use works really well.
We were there during peak season in the middle of the summer, but the crowds never really felt too large. There was always plenty of room to walk, and I never hit a serious crowd crush. We even visited the new Fantasy Springs section of DisneySea, which is a huge new opening for them. And yeah, it was busy, but not too busy. The timed entry system they were using appears to be working as intended. So there's 5 reasons that Tokyo Disney parks have utterly ruined the Disney parks here in the US. I'd like to give an honorable mention to the shopping and merch at these parks, too. Maybe that's an unfair comparison because maybe I just loved shopping there more because it was different than the US, but it really is fun.
The Japan Disney parks have whole categories of merch that you don't really see in the US. Most stores have like whole walls of stationery, which I thought was so cool. And washcloths and blind boxes are everywhere. So are themed sitting mats, which I really loved because you could shove them in your backpack and just pull them out anytime you wanted to flop on the ground for a sitting break. Very cool. And a lot of these souvenirs are really easy to pack, which is a bonus.
To be fair to the US parks, there are a few things that Japan definitely does not do better. Websites and payments, for example. A lot of the online experience of booking a trip and updating your account is really glitchy, which can be annoying. But honestly, if that's my biggest complaint, that's not too bad.
The irony of all of this is that Tokyo Disney is not even run by the Walt Disney Company. The resort is fully owned and operated by the Oriental Land Company under a license from the Walt Disney Company. That's why, for example, Tokyo Disneyland still has Splash Mountain. They get to make their own call on things like that.
So, Luke, this all begs the question, if Japan's Disney parks have totally ruined the US Disney parks because of how great they are, do you think we'll be visiting Disney parks in California and Florida any less often?
No.